Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Alternative Tentacles bATcast. My name is Dominic Davi. You might know me from the band Tsunami Bomb, but you also know me as the slave to Alternative Tentacles. So I am here for another episode of the bATcast to introduce you to the weird, wild, and wonderful world of Alternative Tentacles. And today I have a very special guest. I have Gregg Deal from Dead Pioneers. Thank you so much for joining me on this crazy project that we do.
Yeah, man. Stoked to be here.
Yeah, I am really excited to introduce everybody at Alternative Tentacles like audience to Dead Pioneers. I think they've gotten a bit of a teaser. I think this is one of like the worst kept secrets that we're doing something with you guys. But by the time this comes out, they'll have known it'll be announced, it'll be a thing. So I'm excited to kind of finally be able to like talk about it openly and be clear of what's going on. But before we get into anything, there's been a question that I really wanted to ask you. And it's kind of a heavy one, and I don't mean to come in like hot like this, but I really need to know, who is your favorite Masters of the Universe character and why is it not Fisto?
Oh my gosh. Well, it is Fisto.
Because of course it is. No.
I grew up in an evangelical home,
Mhm.
and my mom wasn't totally immersed into it, but certainly was dipping her toe into the Satanic Panic, the '80s,
Mhm.
and so I wasn't allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons, and I wasn't allowed to watch He-Man. And
Mm.
so I kind of knew some of the characters. And then when Kevin Smith, released his the new cartoon series on Netflix for He-Man, I actually watched it.
Same. Same.
And it was fantastic and sort of like fulfilled a lot of childhood loss, I feel like. But yeah, so I wasn't really into He-Man, even though it was quite popular, because my mom was sort of in that satanic panic moment. And but as a side note, for some reason, my mom was really into the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So like while being like evangelical and probably like maybe a little homophobic and certainly a Republican, and keeping me from these evil Satan things. But I, for some reason, knew who Frankenfurter was. So that's the oddity of my
The
upbringing.
songs were really good. That's why. Your good song will carry you through anything. If you can
It's
you can
true.
put it to a good melody, you'll be surprised who will sing along to those messages. Uh like I
I
mean,
mean,
they don't go so not everybody goes deep, but I get it. Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's pretty I directed the Rocky Horror Picture Show at my home theater when I grew up, like when I was
oh,
growing up.
that's amazing.
I put it on. I put on a cast that performed in front of it and the whole thing, and it was insane.
It
Um,
what's funny is my oldest kid, Sage, who you've met. They are like so into it that there's like theater companies in Denver and that are like kind of performing while the movie is playing, and
yeah,
Stage goes to those and dresses up, and like
it's a
it's a whole
whole
thing, and
thing.
it's
Yeah,
really funny.
I mean it's amazing how it's caught on, and yeah, I was tasked. I don't know why anybody trusted me with it, but they tasked me with like, since we had a company come in and do it and perform in front of the movie, like they were like, we should do our own. You should direct it. And I was like, okay. And so I did, and it worked. It was sold out like every time we did it. It was amazing. I just
Well,
cast every one of the people.
in terms of like like early queer storylines, it's just kind of an amazing feat in itself. And Tim Curry is one of those actors that, like, if you pay attention enough, like his presence will change your life.
Yeah, he's one of those actors that you can catch, like you can do a test. Like, how do you know Tim Curry? It's kind of like
Mm,
Sean Austin. Like, what do you know Sean Austin from? What do you know Tim Curry from? Do you know him from
yeah.
as Darkness? Uh, from
Yep.
oh, what's it called?
Legend.
Legend. There it is. Thank you. Or do you know him as Frankenfurter? Do you know him as
The
Wadsworth the
Butler.
Clue? Yeah, I
Yep.
buttle. I buttle. Um, Clue's one. I've seen some live performances of Clue, but I think you could totally do an act in front of the movie thing with Clue. I think a lot of people tried to make Hedwig happen like that, but I think it was a little too heavy of a story for people to really jump in because.
Yeah.
But that's fascinating that like D&D and Master of the Universe bad, but Rocky Horror Picture Show good. But I think
Every Halloween.
yeah, I think that sums up though kind of that point that like you can I mean, I guess that could tie into my next phase of this thing because it ties into how using music to deliver messages it just still gets through like and
Yeah.
people even when they don't realize it. I mean it's the same thing of like how many Republicans like talk about how Rage Against the Machine is their favorite band and it's like have you Googled the lyrics? Have you thought about what you're
Do
singing?
you, do you know what machine they're raging against?
It's not the washing machine, my man. I'm
Yeah.
glad you like it, but I want you to like listen. We encounter that a lot with Jello and Alternative Tentacles. I think that it's been a fascinating um, experience to realize the audience is who's there. Even he's surprised sometimes about how people have taken certain messages, and we see it in the comments. But it's fascinating. But like, let's talk about Dead Pioneers, this amazing band that you have started. So just to get started, like if people understand that you are, I think like me, you probably cite yourself. Do you cite yourself more as an artist first before musician? Like that you're
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a
that's
20-year, nationally recognized visual art career. I went to college for it and landed on a national stage in like 2013 with a performance art piece that I made in Washington, D.C. And after the recession in 2008, we kind of reached this weird point where it was just like I couldn't get a job doing graphic design unless I wanted to maybe get into sign work, which I've done. But that sign work is, very much a level of, I mean, you're working with your hands. This sounds so snobby, and I do apologize for that, but like, I grew up with working class parents. My father was a car mechanic, my mom was a school bus driver, and I went to college so that I could sort of move out of that place because my father really struggled with that. So for I worked in some sign companies, right after college, and then made it into the Smithsonian and got to work for the Smithsonian's National Museum of American Indians the year that it opened in 2004. And so after 2008, I didn't want to go back. I wanted to try to move forward, in terms of my career, and so I was doing a lot of graphic design work, and then we reached this point where Washington D.C. is not a practical place for graphic design because the biggest clients are the federal government, and the federal government doesn't want anything fancy. They want black type on white paper, and so there's not really any work there. And so I started making work. I went. My concentration was in painting in school, so I started making work, trying to move work while trying to find a job, and then it just transitioned into just doing that full time. And when I got a little bit of national recognition, that brought in the opportunity to speak publicly. My work was suddenly landing in, contemporary art class syllabuses in art, and was showing up in anthropology, and it was showing up in some race theory classes and stuff like that. So it was just this weird switch. But yeah, it's been visual art the whole time, like leading all the way up into it. But performance art is a big part of what I do, and how I gained some notoriety, and I think that dovetails into what we're doing now.
that was going to be something I asked about. So everybody listening really should check out greggdeal.com. GREGGDEAL.com. His art is fantastic. You really want to see this. He's done so much. You did a TED talk, which is amazing, and
Did
it's
two.
you did two. That's
I did two.
fantastic. I only saw one. That's awesome. It's really powerful. Your work is really impressive. I before we had ever even talked, I had looked in. Coachella had told me like you got to check out his work, and I started looking. I love the shirt designs that you have on your site as well. It's really impressive work, and it's funny because I've always considered myself an artist first, but like I'm sitting here drawing horror and geeky shit, and then I'm looking at your stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, this is incredible. The messages that you are putting into your work and expressing, and it's really powerful stuff. And I was just really before we had ever even talked, I was just really impressed with the breadth of everything that you've done. I guess my next question is like, I mean, do you sleep or is it just is it just nonstop? Yeah, how do you handle being
I
tired?
no, it's really funny. And thank you, by the way. I'll be honest. I think I'm mediocre. And
As
and
every artist should think that every single artist is like
but
I'm
I,
mediocre.
you know, I think where I make up the difference in, is maybe in subject, and I can speak to it, and I'm articulate and stuff. So um, that plays a part. For years, I wasn't sleeping. Like legitimately, for years we were hungry. I have quite a few kids. I've been married for over 25 years now, and I've got 5 kids. And um, at the time that all of this started, we had 3 kids, and I was just desperate and working around the clock. I think we figured out there was like 2 or 3 years where I was averaging about 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night, like because I was working through holidays. I mean, I was working 7 days a week, just nonstop. And it really affected my health. Like it really messed me up. And things were starting to turn and get really interesting in 2014. And so when we moved to Colorado after being in the DC area for almost 17 years, we moved here. And my wife, she's kind of a fitness person. She's had 5 kids and like has a 6 pack and looks amazing. And
Nice.
which is hilarious because I've had no kids and I'm just, fat. And
You're a man of
we, but
leisure.
yes, but she said, she was like, listen, like you need to come to bed on time. Like you need to come to bed on time and get up early if you have to, and at the time I was drinking a lot of energy drinks trying to maintain, which was really messing me up. Stay away from the energy drinks, they're terrible. And so I started getting on a schedule. So now I'm on a schedule, like I sleep normal. So I usually get at least 6 hours of sleep. And I'm one of those guys that can live off of that pretty easily.
Yeah.
And but yeah, no, I mean, but to your question also, like never not working. If it's something spinning in my head, and now with the music, like I'm constantly writing things, and just constantly putting things down, trying to figure out like song arrangements, or at least lyrical arrangements to kind of go to song guys to give to my guys so we can pull things together. So I'm constantly writing, I'm constantly conceiving, constantly doing something. So I just kind of never not working, but that's just my mind too.
That's
So
yeah. I mean, you're in good company. That's a lot. There's a bunch of us that are just
yeah,
it's this. I was once told by somebody in the music industry, but this worked with art too. It was just basically like, look, we don't do this because we want to. We do this because we have to, and we are driven to. And sometimes it's spite to prove like this will work. I can do this. I can make this life work for me,
Yeah.
and I will not give up. And it just drives you, and it's incredible. But I love that you've created this really amazing art career for yourself, and you've been able to balance that with having a family and having, a life, and this is fantastic. And then in the middle of all this, you decided to start a punk band. So where did that come
Yeah.
from?
Well, I had this performance art
Chaos.
piece. Yeah. I had this performance art piece that was called the Punk Pan Indian Romantic Comedy. And it was just an hour long sort of one man show where I would give a series of vignettes that would have like I would tell a story and then there would be like a musical segue between vignettes. And so it was just talking about my relationship with my father, who passed about 9 years ago, and how important music was growing up, how important punk rock was growing up, and just how life saving that was to me, just literally life saving. And I lost my best friend when I was in high school. I was about 17, and it messed me up pretty good. And my father kicked me out when I was 17. So it's just sort of telling these entire stories, arriving to the place that I'm at now. And it's an hour long, and those segues where I'm just using music that was really important to me in that time and place. And I got a grant to expand it to create original music for those segues. And so I connected with this group up in Fort Collins called the Music District, and they connected me with a couple of their guys who were musicians, and we started working together. This was right when COVID shutdown happened, so we're like Zooming, but as I think anybody who does music knows, like you can't do anything not in person. Like it's virtually impossible. Like we can go back and forth on some stuff, but like it's a vibe. You got to be in the same room together. And so we worked on a bunch of stuff, and I was pretty gun shy about things because I had never done anything before. Like it was always one of those things I've always wanted to do, but never had the place, position, or even sort of privilege or know how to do it in Utah, where I grew up. And and so we were doing all these things, and it was like it was a good idea. And I was writing it. I'd been writing for years and years up to that point, for about a decade up to that point. So I had a lot of things to draw from, but we're really trying hard and struggling to put it together. So the two guys were Shane and Josh, who are now my drummer and my guitarist, one of my guitarists.
Yeah.
And then it was just sort of a stalemate. Like it took a year or so. And of course, COVID was a big part of that. But I had a residency at in Florida, and it's this huge residency where like you have a mentor and then there's six mentees for different mediums. So there was like a visual art. So I was a mentor for a visual artist, and I had six mentees that were under me that I was working with. And then there was a poet, he had six, and then there was a musician, and he had six. One of the musicians is the lead guitarist for a band out of Atlanta, Georgia, called Algiers, and he just happened to live in the area in Florida, and his mentor was working remotely, which he was a little disappointed about, but he knew who I was, and he was excited for us to connect. It was 3 weeks. The campus we're on is huge. There's a different building for every medium, for dance, for sculpture, for art, for music.
Yeah.
And so there's plenty of space to do anything and everything. And about a week in, we finally like officially met and talked. And he's like, I think I'd really like to do something with you. And I was like, I wrote this thing, and I give it to him. I wrote it the day before in about an hour, and it's called Bad Indian. And it just kind of goes on this tirade of like all the ways in which I'm a terrible a terrible native person from the perspective on the outside. Like, I don't have a good Indian name, and like maybe I don't look the part, or I don't own enough beadwork, or my last name, isn't just like the Indian last name,
Right.
and all these different bits. And he was like, "That's really cool." And we got into a studio that was there. They had a really shitty drum kit. We pulled one of the other musicians who could play drums, and then Lee was there, and he had a bass because it was the only thing that we had available. But I had this pedal that I got from this. It's a distortion pedal, but everything's on an electric current. Like, it just sounds like you could get the same sound with a couple of pedals, but
Right.
this one pedal makes everything sound like it's on an electric current. And Jack White's first, I think, what is it, Third Man Records or whatever, like
Yeah.
sponsored this thing. And I had it, and I had my wife send it to me. And so when we got it, he plugs the bass into it. He comes up with a bass line. The drummer comes up with things. We run through this a couple times as like a spoken word piece with like these sort of like punk riffs.
Hmm.
And we practiced it a couple times. We set up some mics. We pressed record, and we recorded this 6 minute long spoken word song with this like dank bass riff that Lee came up with. And I couldn't believe it. And it really was just like Lee asserting the moment and me being willing to kind of follow his lead
Just go
and
for it.
stuff he came up with.
Right.
And so I sent it to Shane and Josh, and I was like, you guys like check this out. And then suddenly light bulbs went on, and everyone was like, this is it. So I invited Lee. I was like, you should be in our silly little band. Like, we're gonna make music for this performance piece. And we wrote well, it all came together, and I raised money. And Lee lives in Florida, and so I raised money and flew Lee out. And Shane and Josh are already here, and we went up to Fort Collins to some studios at this organization, the Music District. And we got into a little studio, and we had 3 days to write music and to kind of come up with stuff. So the first day, we get into a room for about 7 hours, and we just wrote straight through, took a lunch break, wrote straight through. We get to the end of the day, and I just had like a solo exhibition the weekend before. This is like Monday.
Yeah.
And I get to the end of the day, and I'm just like, man, I am not feeling good. And I took a test, and I tested positive for COVID.
Yeah.
So we only got, and everybody went home. So all we had was that one day, but we had left that one day with like 8 songs. Like, we wrote 8 songs in a day. We recorded them, so we had the riffs. We made proper demos, and we were kind of good to go. And then we looked at it. I was just like this is like a band, right? Like, because I had come up with this idea that like if I'm making the music with the performance piece, that we can pretend like it's a band, using air quotes. And I'll just call the band Dead Pioneers. Tongue in cheek, it's meant to be irreverent towards, a sort of white historical moment of
Yeah.
pioneers, on westward expansion. And they all laughed, and I came up with a logo, and we just kind of laughed it off. And then after we did that session, we were just like, I mean, maybe this is like a real band. Like, this is kind of crazy.
Oh,
And so I raised money so we could all get together again to just go into a recording studio and just lay down all the tracks. So we did it the Blasting Room,
nice.
which Bill Stevenson's place,
Yeah.
from the Descendants.
I
And
recorded there. I've recorded there.
it's great. And their engineers are fantastic. And so, yeah, we recorded everything we had in 2 days. I brought in a song at the last minute that when our engineer took a lunch break, we hashed it out like during the lunch break. And when he got back, we're like, hey, this song's ready. Like, let's just lay it down real quick. And so everything is just like last minute. We're pulling
Yeah.
everything together. But the problem is when we went to go record, it took nearly a year for us to actually get in the recording studio, because we kept having to cancel and reschedule and cancel and reschedule. And towards the end, so this would have been I think February 2023, if I remember right, or January. Um, and Josh, my guitarist, he had a, death in the family, and he's like, I can't come. And so we had Lee, who was actually in town with the Algiers, and he had a something happen where he's like, I have to go home. I can't stay. And so it was just me and Shane, the drummer, and I'm just like, what are we gonna do? And Lee's like, I can mail in bass riffs. I'll just mail them in. Just tell me what you need, and I'll mail them in. And so he was sending stuff virtually, and Shane was just like, I think we're just gonna have to pull, like, maybe this isn't happening. And I'm like, there's got to be a guitarist that we can just pull in that can just fill in for this. He's like, I might know somebody. So he brings in this guy named Abe. Abe looks like he's related to Henry Rollins. It's like kind of an intense looking dude, dresses the same, and he comes in, and he's like, yeah, like with 2 days notice, figures out how to play everything, comes in, actually added some stuff, added a few things to it. And in the middle of recording, just like, should Abe be in the band too? And like, we invited him to be in the band, and he is. So then now we have two guitarists. But we threw together that first record in 2 days, recorded it in 2 days, and wrote one day. And all of that came from this one single performance. That was a really long answer for a single performance art piece.
Not a very good Indian, maybe even a bad Indian. My cheekbones aren't high enough. My last name isn't a sentence. I don't have enough beadwork or turquoise, and I don't speak good pidgin English, certainly not as good as Johnny Depp did in that movie that one time. And I don't care if you connect with Indian spiritualism. I could care less if you did a sweat lodge with your Caucasian spirit guide who knew an Indian once. And sure, millions of Indians died, but tell me about your feelings and cry your white tears. I'm just gonna be over here being a bad Indian. A woman once asked me my Indian name, and I said, it's Greg. And she was so disappointed. She was like, no, it has to be Red Eagle or Two Rivers or Gray Skull. I said, yes, wait, is that for real? No, I said, without her realizing my brief but generationally relevant He-Man joke, the kind of joke that would tell her that while Indian, I'm also having an American experience too. I finally said to her, how about Walking Eagle? And she said, yes, but is that true? I said, yes, it's totally true. And I never had the heart to tell her that the only time an eagle walks is when it's too full of shit to fly. Because I'm a bad Indian. One time, a man walked into my space and he asked me some questions about my things. I tell him. When he suddenly interrupts me, as only a white man can, with all the Euro swagger of a man whose people were so sure of their place in the universe, their place in the world, their place in the eyes of God. You speak real good for a Native American, an Indian, a savage, a pagan, a prairie a godless heathen, and I would be justified in punching him, and I would be justified in cursing him out, and I'd be justified in calling him racist, but that would make me a bad Indian, which contradicts that old saying, you know the one, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, but I'm a bad Indian, and I'm here.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's so funny to like it's funny because the way you guys came together is it's got this sense of intention to it, but it's also still the random confluence of events and presences to bring it all together. But it's wild to me how quickly you were able. I mean, it doesn't feel quickly because it took place over a lot of time, but the amount of time you had together to make it happen was quick. like if you put that all together, it's not that much time. It just happened to be spread out because of the way the world was and with everybody being spread out. But
Yeah, I mean, when everything came together, like it was nuts that we pulled off what we pulled off because we just had budget restraints.
yeah,
And Chris Biebel, who's the engineer we work with, who mixed everything, and he was just like, okay, like I'm on board. He'd never, I don't think he'd ever done anything like this. Where like, how do you figure out levels on spoken word? Like that's just kind of a strange thing
yeah,
because there's all this other sound that's happening. But yeah, he I think he liked it, rose to the challenge, and was just like down for it. So everybody was on board. And there was some discussion about how possible this was, but I was just like, just let's just go. Like let's just go and see how it
yeah.
goes. So
Exactly. It's if you start talking about how possible, like one of the things I've told people before, if you start really thinking about how likely any of the concepts that we do around art and music and creative processes, it's like if you try and like you could talk yourself out of anything. You have to
yeah,
have a certain amount of audacity to just do it, to presume like I'm going to do this and push this as far as I possibly can to see how far it goes. And you guys have come pretty fucking far in a really short amount of
yeah,
time. When we played together, didn't you guys say it was like your ninth live show?
I think that's right.
Your ninth live show when we played with you guys.
It's
And
I think
I was
maybe
like,
it's the way
what?
we've written. It's really strange. And to your statement about audacity, like even my wife, who's way more pragmatic than I am about things, was just like, "What the hell are you? What are you doing, man? Like, you can't start a band in your 40s. That's weird." And eh, but there's this interesting narrative in there too. Like, are we a group of guys in the twilight of our music careers, just like flailing to matter at the last minute? Or is this tied to a greater sort of experiment of art and expression? Because I've never treated this like a music thing. Like I'm only now treating it that way because it's becoming that. But to me, like within the writing and within sort of the composition of everything, it lives within the space of an artistic medium. And as an artistic medium, I think it's really interesting, and it's fun to work through as a medium. And that ends up meaning that like we're not in the throes of the twilight of our career, trying to make things matter. We're creating something that lives in a larger space. And because it ends up being art and it ends up being music, it ends up being both things. And so my visual art career ends up playing a role in sort of informing what's happening there as well, which is a really interesting way of looking at it. Because I think most musicians are pretty artistic beyond their music and don't usually like they might do it a bit before the music, then make a break on the music, and then the artistic end of things ends up sort of being a part of it, like when you're not on tour and you're working on things like watching Tim Armstrong doing prints and selling prints and stuff. Like I would have never expected that, except that art is part of the discussion that we're having sort of within these musical spaces. So
Okay.
it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've always considered myself an artist first. That's what I did before I was ever a musician, before I ever made the decision to be a musician, before I picked up a bass. I was drawing and creating things and doing photography and creating these, and acting and trying to create things out of nowhere and just make something. I just always was
Yeah.
compelled to make something. And even as a musician, I still feel I'm an artist. And then long after people stop watching me perform on stage, I'm still going to be making art. So, I
Yeah.
mean, for me, that's never been a non-part, that's always been part of the discussion. And it's pretty obvious that it infuses everything that you're doing and how it's going. The music, the perception of it being this punk band that's getting some success and attention and existing in the space is really, it's an offshoot of who you are already, but it's,
Yeah.
it's so easy to sit there and go like you said, like, are we at a bunch of older guys doing this at the twilight of our lives? No, it doesn't work like that, really. We can convince ourselves it works like that since pop music and mainstream music becomes so focused on age.
Yeah.
We've moved away. The mainstream has moved away from rewarding older musicians, which is always really crazy to me because like older musicians and graphic designers and older artists, they don't get worse. They only get better
Right.
at what they do.
Right.
So it's always interesting to me, you know, that aspect that there's any sort of thing. I remember I have a band called Loud Graves, and our singer one time was having a difficult time going, I feel like this band would be bigger if I was like younger and skinny and like maybe prettier and stuff. And I'll never forget, like, and we're all like, no, 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 but I'll never forget my guitarist was like, first off, have you seen the audiences of punk rock that we played to? Who do you think these people are? They're not
Yeah.
kids. They're not kids anymore. But they are too. Like but the idea being that there shouldn't be a limit to things. But I think the reason that Dead Pioneers has struck such a chord and so quickly is it's not that it's rewriting this entire type of thing that has never existed before, but I definitely feel that there is a void right now that it is filling, that nobody was really existing in, not only in the sense of, you know, the message of that infuses your work in the totality of the Native American experience in current now, right now, how it
Yeah.
is, and the existence, and how it is recognized, how it is appreciated. um but I think it's also in the sense of sonically, having a band with the a level of aggression and attack and articulation in the music itself, with spoken word being the delivery, and a powerful spoken word. I mean, I know so much has been made of Bad Indian. That's your main video. It's really taken off. That's a song that like most people write. That's the introduction, but it is a good introduction to Dead Pioneers and to the point, because it's a good summary statement of you saying like this is a personal story, but it is also a story that you all need to hear. And
Yeah.
I'm about to tell you, I'm going to introduce you to a lot of things that maybe maybe you've thought, like, in a passing glance, you're like, oh yeah, yeah, that Johnny Depp thing, that was weird, but you don't think about it because you just move on and you're
Right.
moving on. But then you're like, I'm going to call attention to this, but I'm calling attention into a very personal way. This is my personal experience, but it applies. And I think it was a very good introduction. And then you go further into your band's work, and it's incredibly strong. I mean, it's hilarious to me that you guys came up with this album the way you did, because it sounds so much more intentional than that, but it does have a lot of raw power to it. So I think it makes sense that people, to me, are getting excited about it in such a short time. I'm
Oh,
impressed
thank you.
because you guys are coming out of Colorado, and you know, I had assumed, because I had seen you guys mentioned, and then Jello came to us at Alternative Tentacles, and he's like, I want to work with Gregg and Dead Pioneer. This is incredible. And then I remember here, like, I was like, wait, don't they have an album out with somebody? And he's like, I want to figure out a way for us to work with them. And it was really excited. And then I got introduced. So I was really shocked when Tsunami Bomb played the Rocky Mountain Tentacle Fest in Denver. And it was such a great show. And then you guys you guys played, and you guys were every bit as awesome as your videos suggested. And then you're like, yeah, this is show number 9. I was like, what the fuck? Show number 9? Wait. I thought you guys have been around for a bit, or you toured around a bit. And so it's impressive, because I don't think people realize how recent this has all been. Like, how did you guys get
Yeah.
introduced to Hassle? How did you find Hassle Records? How did this go from this performance piece that's now becoming a band, and you recorded this album at Blasting Room, which is a fantastic studio. You picked a great place to do it. And then, oh, now you're on Hassle Records in the UK, right? Out of England, right? Aren't they?
Yeah. After we did the first record, because we did everything independently, and we sort of did a pre-order on the records to help pay for everything. We had everything like in place, and we had like that initial Bad Indian that I did with Lee in Florida. We mixed it a little bit and we released it. So we had just that single. It was almost 6 minutes long, sitting on our Spotify, and so there had been a little bit of buzz, nothing crazy, but at the very least, it was this interesting experiment. And then we did the record, we released the record, and it was so stressful because we had to raise the money and just doing it independently.
Oh, yeah.
And I just straight up told the guys, I was like, I don't want to do this again if we don't have any kind of support. Like, it's so freaking stressful to do this. And of course, the life of an independent musician or musical act, like, you have to mail everything out yourself. You have to, like, it's just so much work.
It's so much more than people think. So,
it's daunting and it's overwhelming, and you have to budget it. And like, I had some trouble because I underestimated the cost of shipping overseas. And so like, then you got to take on that cost. And it's still, in many ways, feel like I'm still recovering from that. But I straight up just said, look, I don't want to do this again if like we can't get some sort of support, and I don't necessarily expect us to get any support. And so I thought we had something good, and was like, yeah, this is cool. It very much plays, I think, as an homage to sort of old punk rock, even without considering the two covers that we had on that first record, which was the Punchline from Minutemen and World Up My Ass from the Circle Jerks.
Yeah.
And but there was a little bit of like weirdness in there, but we released it September 16th, 2023 on streaming. And by February the next year, 2024, this year, we had over 500,000 original streams with no marketing, no publication whatsoever. We put it on Bandcamp. We got picked. We got picked up by a couple of a couple bloggers and stuff, and then it started getting picked up in a couple places. But I think it's really important to note in terms of that void that you were talking about. Black Lives Matter's second go around happened during COVID. And there was a national discussion on race that opened the door not just for Black people and equality and the liberation of Black Americans, under the understanding that there was a significant amount of inequity within the engagement of police and the brutality that has traditionally been a part of that engagement. But then also suddenly recognizing that it affects not just Black people, but it also affects brown people, and very specifically Indigenous people. And we have these statistics. I mean, we're such a small part of the American population that, as I think somewhere between 1% and 5%, we face I think between the ages of, I think like 18 and 45, the biggest number of police brutality and deaths than any other minority group per capita in the United States. Second or first only to, black males that are in a similar demographic. And because we're such a small minority, that's not usually talked about. And I don't think it's nearly as visual as the police brutality against Black people, and watching everything that has been happening from the first Black Lives Matter to the second Black Lives Matter. But what's really interesting within that national discussion, and even just sort of having some understanding, knowledge, and solidarity for those efforts, Black Lives Matter straight up opened the doors for people of color and for people from marginalized groups in a way that's not happened, I don't know if ever, to be honest. I started getting opportunities with my work in 2020, 2021, and 2022 that I'd never had before. Doors were opening that had never been opened before. When there was pressure put on the Washington football team to change their mascot that I was a part of in the original discussion in 2013 and 14, living in Washington, D.C., I was one of maybe a dozen faces that was part of this discussion, this national discussion. It was Black Lives Matter and people who were in positions of power that used Nike and FedEx to put pressure on the Washington football team to change those names. So Black Lives Matter is 100% just this entity that really used their voice and power to reach past the Black community and into other marginalized communities, which nationally opens the floodgates for people to see things, understand things, and hear things for the first time. And as a result, give quarter to ideas and narratives that have never been given quarter before. And I think that's why Dead Pioneers has a place, because the open-mindedness of people realizing that there are marginalized groups that have these stories that are not just important to the narrative and sort of historical, the historical context of people in the United States from these marginalized groups, but also that like Indigenous people, as being the first peoples of this nation, have stories to tell that don't need to be told by anybody except them. And it's a fascinating premise when we're beginning to be given quarter for those things. You can see it in television. There's a show called Reservation Dogs, which is still on FX. That's a huge narrative towards Indigenous stories, but not just Indigenous stories, but also like very specific Indigenous stories, to the degree that they're telling jokes and storylines that almost only Native people understand, but it still has reason and purpose to be in place. And I talk in one of my TED Talks about how not creating art that follows the narratives that are familiar to a buyer's market or to the viewing public is a risk, because you're not creating something that they're familiar with, and therefore they may not be interested in it. And so we're breaching past that into a place where we can tell stories that people might not know, and that there's relevancy in that. So I think that might be a reason why Dead Pioneers sort of works in that space. But going back, I didn't want to do this again if it didn't work. And we played our first live show, and it was like, I don't know, this whole thing felt like something I really wanted to do for a long time. And to be clear, the music that I'm writing is the music that I wish I could have heard when I was a kid. Like I'm literally writing stuff that's like, what would music sound like? Or what music would I want to hear when I was young? What music would empower me when I was young, which is also, I think, an interesting driving force to the content, because I'm thinking about that young Native person that doesn't feel represented in different places. It's a little easier within the punk genre, because punk is already talking about disenfranchisement and not belonging and fighting against powers that would otherwise sort of oppress these marginalized communities. But to do something that ends up being specifically Indigenous ends up playing a really important role that to me it feels important. There's other bands, like there's a band called 1876 out of Portland, and they do like powwow punk rock, and it's very much in the same space in terms of like making something that is just unapologetically Indigenous, not just in their musical arrangement but also in their lyrics. And I think that's really cool and important. Um, but because we got those numbers, and this is how some of the music industry is working now, Hassel didn't see us play live. They heard us and wanted to. Um, they heard us because somebody passed us to them, and then saw the numbers, I think, and that everything sort of like added up to being something that they felt like would be important. So there's a music. There's a guy that has a radio show on BBC. Talks about music. His name's Daniel Carter, and he and I became friends with me not knowing who he was because we were just casually talking about Dead Pioneers, and he passed our name to Hassel because he's known those guys for a long time, and so we signed a record deal in April. And for what we're doing and how we're doing it, like it's a sweetheart deal.
Yeah.
Um, and I was kind of like, because I was talking to Jello in January. We did a live performance in Denver in January, and he was in town because he has family in Colorado,
Right.
And he came to the show, and he told me that they weren't looking for acts, and and I and I told him, and to be honest, I was like, that's okay. Like I'd rather be your friend. Like I don't need something from you. I know who you are. I know what your work is, and I think it's fascinating. And looking at the spoken word aspect, and even just sort of the artistic aspect of the music. Um, Obviously, like Henry Rollins' Black Flag and their spoken word plays a part in that. Minutemen plays a big part in that. Jello and the work that he did, not just with, Dead Kennedys, but obviously also with the Guantanamo School of Medicine, lives within this space of spoken word and articulating political and social ideas that are important. And so I can't deny the influence of that. That's sort of an incredible thing.
Yeah,
I don't know
he's
if I answered your question.
you did, and then some. No, and then some. I think honestly, I think it with indigenous people here in America, I think that it has had a unique experience with American society that I don't know if, while there's so many similarities with other minorities and the treatment of other minorities within
Sure.
America, I think there is a bit of a unique situation where it, I mean, it carries over in others, but I think that in a sense, American society has done this unique thing with indigenous peoples where both grinding a slow grind to absorb them into regular society and culture, but also romanticizing and tokenizing the concept of the historical concept. It has become this thing that it's, and because I think also because you stated there's not as many, the population is so small, it becomes this
Mhm.
thing where I've seen you touch upon it, where you get this reaction of like, oh, whoa, you're an Indian, it's like, oh, and you have this response that sometimes becomes offensive and indelicate on the part of people who are like, oh, what's your Indian name, or what's this concept, because they have this romanticized concept of what that means. And I do
Yeah.
agree, it is interesting that you pointed out that how much Black Lives Matter opened the doors, because it has felt like there has been slowly more and more of an exposure of what these issues are. Everything from the movement to draw attention to, violence towards indigenous women,
Mm.
to the show Reservoir Dogs, and just in pop culture, there's suddenly these. I think you're right. I guess I hadn't thought about it until you presented it with a timeline where I realized I could see how it's these doors are opening up where pop culture is suddenly open to, I want to know what we've done, what has been done here, what are we missing,
Yeah.
and how those stories can be told and be looked at and interacted with. I think within the punk scene, you have this existence of like this conceptual, like you said, disenfranchisement and, you know, being the square peg in the round hole in general, with that every punk
Mhm.
really truly feels in some way, shape, or form, which is not unique to a liberal stance, which is why I think we do have conservative punks. I think that you can be, I think that's, even though it sounds like a misnomer when you think about it and it doesn't make sense, I think that's, I think that's why you get some, Republican politician going like Rage Against the Machine is my favorite band. And it's like, what? But I think that, I think that is something that's in a personal feeling of like, I am this square peg, yeah, trying to fit in this round
Mhm.
hole. But I think that the message that you bring to the table, the Dead Pioneers, that your art and your music and your lyrics are bringing to the table, is that, is so much right with that, but then a unique expression that I think so many people are responding to, because they're like, I don't. I honestly think that some of the, even just in within that one track, Bad Indian, that has gotten so much attention. There's so many scenarios that you present that I think so many people could be like, I could have done that. I could have said that. I could have responded that way without even thinking, because why wouldn't I? And you lay out like why these interactions are ridiculous. And
Yeah.
I think it's I think that's really grabbed people, and I think it's important. I think that I'm glad that you have channeled your performance art into this punk rock setting, because I think it's important that it exists here, and I think that it needs to, and its success shows that it does. And everything I've listened to has been incredibly impressive. You guys are a great bunch of musicians, and I love what you're doing. I'm really excited for your future. I can't wait for people to see what you guys have coming. I'm really excited that Alternative
Yeah.
Tentacles was able to convince Hassel and you guys to do a 7-inch. It's funny because Jello will, because we've had to deal with a lot of, running a record label is not easy, and it's been a challenge to navigate so many different
I
issues.
bet.
You touched upon it, like you got to see how hard it was. You're like, I don't want to do this is terrible. I don't want to mail this stuff out. I don't want like deal with the pressing plants and try and make this a thing. It's hard. And So sometimes he'll see things that he likes and he's like, oh, I would love to do this, but like we're currently dealing with these financial issues. So he'll be like, we're not looking for anything. And you're just like, okay, I'm just glad you're here checking it out. I had a similar interaction with Jello about stuff like that at one point. So it was funny to hear that, because I understand um, why he does that and what he means by that. But I'm really glad
Yeah.
it worked out. I know we
Me
pull
too.
our 7-inch pulls 3 tracks from the Hassel uh, debut, and I'm glad, because I feel like that's a way for us to talk about what you guys have going on and be a part of that conversation. And now we're vested, and I'm excited, because I love the 7-inch. I love the album, and I'm really excited about what you guys have coming. Um,
It's
I
a
find,
bucket list.
yeah,
Dude, seriously, like, I mean, to be able to have anything come out of AT is a bucket list. You say convincing Hassel. There was no convincing. Hassel was just like, yeah, like, of course, that's amazing. Because it helps us along, like, obviously, because there's an audience that is like generations in the making, and but more than that, it's just, Alternative Tentacles is just this incredible name in the scene that's tied to Jello Biafra. And I mean, Like it's a no-brainer, man. That's
Yeah.
really, really amazing. And I can tell you the Hassel guys were like really stoked about it because they have the same feeling on the other side of the pond towards Jello and towards Alternative Tentacles. Like, how amazing is that?
It's interesting to be a part of Alternative Tentacles in the sense of I feel this incredible weight of responsibility of because there was a time when I was the GM and now I'm just doing marketing, and every time I try to get away they bring me back in, but and being signed to the
It's like
label
the
as well.
Godfather.
Yeah, it's I can't escape. See, why we're friends. That pop reference. That's how I knew as soon as you were like Gray Skull, and I was like, yep, this guy's my kind of pun. He does my kind of puns. But yeah, it's just I feel this tremendous weight of responsibility to honor what AT is, to struggle against the misunderstandings that happen with AT constantly. And just try and do a good job in the face of a host of obstacles, financial and otherwise. Um, do you feel that kind of sense of burden of responsibility? Because it's something that I think about with bands that there's so many bands that do well and they're just like singing about bullshit. And I mean, and they admit it. Like, I mean, the Blink 182 guys have gotten rich off singing about bullshit. About just not
Yeah.
being old enough to be taken seriously and having a crush on somebody and being mad at everybody and God, everybody won't take us seriously and like, where are you? I don't know. And it's just they have it's their own, and I'm not belittling Blink 182. I'm not. I like those guys. They're really hilarious. They've created this, you know, this point of view. But they're kind of unburdened because they can sing about whatever they want. If they
Sure.
want to sing about having a crush, or they want to sing about their crazy ex, or they want to sing about the crazy partner, they can sing obnoxious stuff. It's for them. They sang a song that was like shit, piss, fuck, cock, sucker, motherfucker, shit,
Yeah,
fart,
yeah.
twat. It's like shit, fart, turd, twat. Like that was the whole song, and it's good. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
It's funny, but there are those like Jello who have, and yourself, who have focused more on a message and trying to not, you're not taking yourself, I don't think there was ever an intention, at least with Jello, to become like, I am this representation of all that is resistance to become,
Mhm.
encouraging people to become the media and doing all this and fight for these causes. And I asked him once, because when I realized we had to reissue, this is a meandering way to get to my question, I'm sorry, but we had to reissue when we reissued this Mojo Nixon and Jello Biafra, Will the Fetus Be Aborted? And it was we started repressing. Yes, there you go. We started repressing the 7-inch once we realized they were gonna they were gonna cut through Roe versus Wade and return it to pull away from the federal oversight and
Mhm.
return it to the states. And I was like, this is, we're listening to it. And of course I knew about it. I'd listened to it, but I couldn't believe, I was like, after all this time, this was put out in the early 90s, and this is still a thing. This is still
Mhm.
applies. This tongue-in-cheek, ridiculous country western punk song that you did applies. I was like, and I asked Jello, I was like, do you ever get exhausted or overwhelmed that you're having the same conversations that you had when you were young now, and you're still trying to make this point? And he's like, yes, I do. I am annoyed, but he's like, it doesn't make it any less important. And there has been progress. And I've tried to come to terms with certain things so that I can continue the conversation and keep moving things forward. So that's my meandering point to this, is like, you have become you are becoming this representation to some people, like by putting yourself out there as an artist and as a performance artist, and now as the frontman of a punk band, uh like to representing this introduction to people and about Indigenous and Native peoples' problems and issues, and the experience, both the experience of being Native, a Native American, and being American, and trying to coexist in this space. Does that ever feel exhausting, too much? Like, I mean, how do you find, I mean, is it just like, are you just pissed off enough to be like, fuck you, I will be angry forever? But or how do you find, how do you find the encouragement to keep going on and deal with these ridiculous interactions? Because I mean, even when we started talking, you were like, hey, just so you know, there's nothing gonna offend me. If you have a question, ask it. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But like, you're like, I'd rather you ask it than be afraid. And that's from somebody who's obviously experienced a lot of these kind of interactions. So like, how do you handle that ongoing, the burden of the message that you must now carry? That makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's I don't think it's something I have to carry alone. Because usually when I'm talking about this stuff, particularly in the Native stuff, it's a shared narrative. I'm not speaking for Native people. I'm just offering my experience. But I do know that my experience tends to be a shared narrative that other Native people have. And so I'm in a very privileged position to hear from Native people who feel a way about what they hear, and maybe they connect with it, or they appreciate it. But there's a political component as well. I mean, the first song on the first record is Tired, and it's about being tired about racism and homophobia and transphobia and ableism, and there's all these just different elements. I mean, the first line is America is a pyramid scheme, and you ain't at the top, and which is derived ever so slightly from George Carlin's statement of like, it's a club and you ain't in it. And so there's a larger shared experience with that as well. And I think Native people are in an interesting position, because if you don't completely assimilate, you see all the gaps, and they're just very stark, because they affect you personally, because they affect our tribal communities, because they affect the sort of overall intertribal community in the United States. Trump coming into office and being the fascist that he is, and surrounding himself with other Nazi fascist people, ultimately is going to affect everybody. What's interesting is how quietly it affects Native people. And some of that has to do with just, the optics of it, and how accessible that information is, how much that information is being given to popular media, and whether or not people see that. But, like when the government shut down when Trump was in office, which was the longest government shutdown in United States history, on the back end of that, each tribe, there's about 570 tribes, 70 something tribes in the United States that are recognized by the federal government. And each individual tribe has a relationship with the federal government that is unique. So some tribes get help and subsidies with healthcare facilities, or like there's a Lakota tribe that gets monies that help support an ambulance, because people don't have cars. And so, you can get an ambulance to come way out here to pick you up, to take you to the facilities that you need help in. And so like that ends up being really important. So there's different relationships that happen with different tribes. My tribe, the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, their relationship with the federal government is in getting help with prescription drugs on the tribe, which really affects elders and people who have heart disease, diabetes, need insulin, like all those things. So when that government shutdown happened, they didn't have resources to any of those things for the entire time. Like, people died when that government shutdown happened. And it speaks to the relationship and the reliability that some tribes have to the federal government, which is not an arbitrary thing. Most of those relationships are based on treaties. And if they're not based on treaties, they're based on a federal trust obligation that the United States has to Native tribes, under a Supreme Court hearing. Like the Supreme Court said that this obligation is in place, whether there's treaties or not. All of that is pointing towards land obtained, services rendered for land obtained. Like it's kind of a contract in there, and it's understood that like Native people should be on the receiving end of those things because of the land that was ultimately taken, and on some level, maybe hopefully because of lives that were lost, sort of in what is popularly called the American genocide. um, those things happen and nobody knows about it. Those things happen and like they're just kind of quietly in the background. And maybe it's not a huge riot that's taking place, but somebody losing their life because they don't have enough heat in their house in North Dakota is not how somebody should be going out ever. An elder should be taken care of. At the very least, Social Security should be able to help, take care of those things.
Right.
And so that stuff ends up happening, and I recognize that, and I recognize how important it is to say those things out loud. I'm not here really to educate people so much as articulate my experience that I recognize may be a unique experience to some people. And the variety and the context and just the different ways that works out. I mean, like somebody who doesn't grow up on a reservation, as I did not, is still having an indigenous experience. That your experience is somehow disqualified because you didn't grow up in a certain place. Also, it's very strange for someone to say that, like, oh, you didn't grow up on a reservation, so you're not like a real Indian, while standing on native land is just baffling to me. But there's a lot of different ways in which these things exist, and the duality of our existence is something that I don't think people understand either. A lot of Americans clearly are having a difficult understanding the idea of being from another country and being in America and being proud of both things. Or even just being proud of the one thing, the original country that you come from. And so the duality is like that I can do ceremonies, I can speak my language, but I can also listen to, Jello Biafra in the Guantanamo School of Medicine and feel a way about that. So there's like so many different ways that we exist within those spaces. It's sometimes exhausting. I have a good setup. My home is set up in such a way that I have a lot of escape to spend time with my kids, and that is a balance. But the balance has to be had. You have to have the balance. It was really funny. I was talking to a dude once, and he was just like, you're not very angry. Like, it's really interesting to me because I feel like you have every reason to be angry, and you're not angry. I'm like, man, I am 100% angry all the time. But I'm also like in my 40s and have figured out how to channel that stuff into other things, and how to work through that in a way that I hope is healthier than being the kid filled with piss and vinegar. Although we do always need the kid filled with piss and vinegar. Punk rock would not exist without kids.
No.
Filled with piss and vinegar.
It always has to have new blood, new perspectives,
yeah,
new kids coming in, and without it doesn't work. It won't continue. But yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's interesting because right now, with the election working how it did, we have so many people experiencing these levels of despair, and I think to some degree this despair is something that's like, I feel like there's a certain amount of minority people who've expressed in both media and anecdotally, it's like where they're like to some of the white liberals, like, hey, first time, this is new for you. Well, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
it's so hard, and there's been this like, we're at the time of this recording, we are still seeing a lot of blame going around, when the reality is just about every type of demographic in a slight, went for Trump. I mean, granted, it's a third of the voting population, but they voted. That third elected the president. It was, I think, at the last time I looked, it was 50.1% he won by, and it was enough. That was enough, and that was it. That's who voted. A lot of people didn't vote. A lot of people, a lot of people didn't vote at all. Some people didn't vote for president. They voted everything else.
Third party.
Yeah. And we have this discussion of a lot of people looking at who to blame and try to process it and try to understand why there was this shift by people's different variety of people who, was able to overlook so much. You and I had touched upon this topic before in our own conversation, but like how what is your perspective on it? I feel like like with the situation happening as it is, like how do you speak, how do we speak to people who, one, we have people who are defiantly going like, yeah, he won. It's great. See? And then you have other people who are like, I don't know how to deal with this. So it's like here, we have this dichotomy, and with Alternative Tentacles audience, we 100% have both engaging. We have a huge amount of people who think that we're a bunch of assholes, and we should be crying our tears. And then we have some people who are like looking to us for some sort of, I have never seen so many emails come in asking for Jello to release a What Would Jello Do? Like it's crazy. And he's like, when I'm ready, there's plenty out there for you to look at. And I know he's working on stuff, but it's interesting to see how this is playing out. I mean, what's your take on it? What do you think?
As I think my son says, like, we're cooked, and we're
fucked. It's like,
and I don't think he's wrong on some level. I don't know. I heard a guy say like, okay, like, so this is what we're doing. Like, we turn the stove on and now we're going to touch the stove and we're going to see what happens. And, it is what it is. But I don't think that, it was really interesting because the first time that he made it into office, everybody was really upset. And, there's all these dramatic videos of like white liberals like crying and like, and I get it. Like, I don't want to belittle that. I mean, I get it. But on some level too, like, I don't think Trump realized he was going to win. I mean, you could kind of tell by how long it took for him to put his cabinet together, how long it took, like, he didn't know what the transition was, and just everything was just a hot mess. Clearly are prepared for this second round in a way that is quite terrifying. And even looking at, his initial appointments, it's not looking good. It's looking really, really dicey. And as Henry Rollins said, now is not the time to be dismayed. Now is punk rock time. This is the moment that Joe Strummer's been training us for, and that good people are really important right now. And I think it's really easy to get dismayed. I know I was. I mean, I didn't sleep well that night. I kept waking up, looking at my phone. And my wife too, very much. And she woke up early that morning and she was like, he won. And we were both upset and dismayed by it. But then that started morphing into something else. Because I realized that, over the last 4 years that I've been allotted a space to say things out loud, and I'm grateful for that, and I have a duty to that. So I got in touch with the Dead Pioneers, the rest of the guys, and basically was like, look, we can keep going and sort of like skirt through this as best we can, or we can swing for the fences. And we're already pretty political, but like we could be more so.
Mm-hmm.
And the palatability of a lot of the political stuff we do, like there's a humor attached to it, and that there's a little something tongue in cheek that's attached to it, which makes it palatable, which I do think is important. But I also think like that the message has to be what the message is. And we had a early morning discussion the day after the election, like, what are we going to do next? And every last one of us was just like, nope, we need to double down. We need to go harder. We need to make sure that this message is there, sort of come what may. We have an obligation and a duty to say the things that are being said quietly, to say those things out loud. And it's also interesting because we have this new record coming out next year, and we've got quite a few political songs on it, and it's really interesting because they were all politically relevant and socially relevant. And we did them and just kind of did it like unapologetically, not knowing that this was going to be the outcome.
I love it. I don't mean to. I love it. I was really impressed with it, and listening to it. I mean, I was like, as soon as I started it, I wrote you, and I was like, dude, oh, this is so good. And then I love it. And then but what reason I interrupt is I couldn't believe that there was a part of me that's like, he wrote this before, because it feels like a response. And it
does. Well, and we are like, those things were already, I felt like, hitting pretty hard. But now after the election, like, it's way more intense. The stuff that's coming out, I think is terrifyingly relevant. It shouldn't be that relevant. But it is. And it's really interesting because, like, I think liberalism is showing its face right now in sort of some interesting ways. Like there's been, I saw a number of statements of people who are just like, they were basically saying like, Muslims and Arabs, fuck you, Mexicans, fuck you, like, for voting for this guy, without realizing that the largest group that voted for Trump were whites. And so I've been having a lot of people coming to me being like, well, what's up with the Native Americans? Why are they voting for this? And it's just like, I don't know, man. Why don't you worry about your own people? Like, you've got the largest group of, and so there's finger pointing happening, and it's just like you should be pointing the finger at yourself if you're really concerned about what people are doing. There's also just this idea that like minority groups have to vote all in the same direction. All of that is to say that the polls that came out that were talking specifically about those demographics of people who are voting in specific ways was extremely limited, over the phone. And for Native people, and this is a really important point, for Native people, self-identifying Native people, so what quantifies you as being a Native American, what quantifies you as, and so that's not considered in there as well. So it could be a white person from Georgia who thinks that their great-great-grandmother is a Cherokee, and like that's just a blood myth that exists in your family, but they feel like that they can say those things out loud. That's not the same as somebody who belongs to a Native community. So those polls are really, really damaging and not manipulative. And but it was really interesting, the conversations of people being like, "What's up with Native Americans?" And it's just like, fuck you. What's up with your people? Like, what? Worry about your own folks.
Yeah.
But it's just stressful for sure. I think that we need to, just continue forward. I don't know that anything has changed.
No,
I mean, we might end up on a list. That might be changes.
Yeah, I mean,
end up on a list, but
I would say, initially my biggest worry, okay. I think that what the reality that people need to face is that while misogyny and racism and fears that even people who don't understand what they're feeling is racism, they just have
Yeah.
these emotional responses to changes and things that they are perceiving, um and sexism, and they're like, I'm not racist, I'm not sexist, I just don't like what I see, and I think that the world is there. I don't care what people actually do. But you actually do care.
Yeah.
I think that goes on. That's just this huge part of it. But I do think also, I realized, like, when this happened, I realized I needed to understand what was going on as best I could, from from all perspectives. I needed to get, and I found a number of articles that we're talking about. But the most interesting thing I found was somebody online had asked, like, "Hey, Trump voters, just tell me why. Like, no, I'm not fighting with you. I just want to hear why." And reading through it,
Yeah.
I realized that the majority of people were willing to overlook all the red flags, because most people do not go that deep. Most people are just trying to live. They're not going to research. They're not going to go down a deep hole. They're not autistic. they're not. They're not ADHD hyper focusing and absorbing all of the articles and implications of what things that people are saying. They're not doing that. They're just trying. They get the surface and they get a summary and they move on with their lives, because the truth be, they just are trying to make their life work. And the amount
Yeah.
of people who were willing to ignore 34 felonies, a court adjudicated rapist, all the implications of what he was actually saying, and what the chaos of some of the statements conflicting with each other. This didn't matter, because he represented the closest and best chance to change the narrative of this country in some way. And to that speaking, I think anybody who had an intelligent argument, like, I think Bernie Sanders would have clobbered him, because that's somebody who's offering an ultimate, it's like, I think people were willing to, at this point, people wanted to just a change. And Harris was clearly, to them, going to be more of the same. And more of the same
Yeah.
is not working. And I can't say to anybody that's not true. I can't tell them that's not true. They're right. And it seems like people are very excited about the concept of blowing up the fucking government and withdrawing spending. The problem I have with that is that the people that they have chosen to throw their lot in are the people who are going to endanger the kind of support that you just spoke about, that was affected by a government shutdown. Programs that are going to be cut potentially could be the obligations, easily could be the obligations to
Sure.
those treaties, to any sort of support. I mean, people aren't thinking about, like, he's talking about, just as an example, he's talking about blowing up the Department of Education and going
Mhm.
after schools that don't teach the way they want them to teach, which is ironic, because if you blow up the Department of Education, all that happens is that the states will have to fund all of their programs and schooling at a state level,
Right.
which is difficult for all the states to do, but they will have to. But then the federal government will have no say over those schools anymore. So the only way you can affect or potentially penalize the schools is through a Department of Education that exists. So if you're going to blow it up, this is the kind of the process that's going in. These things aren't thought about. They're just sort of the most
No.
surface version of things. So my stance would be, like, I know that they didn't know they were going to win last time, but this time they weren't sure, and they did. And then now that they are, we are seeing a lot less adults in the room. These are some of the, like, the cabinet that he's putting together. I've looked into them, and I am concerned. But, like, I also see them saying things like, you can't, how are you going to do that, buddy? How are you going to make that happen? I'm seeing a
Yeah.
I'm seeing a situation where, globally, America has just taken the bench for 4 years, because we're going to be fighting with each other for this whole time. Like there's going to be lawsuits and court cases, and I know people are concerned the way that what kind of judges are, but these things take time. Like these guys are going. I know people are going to get hurt, and I don't want to belittle that. And I know it's
Right.
going to be scary. There are going to be, and I do believe, like you said earlier, people are going to die from this. There are going to be people
Yeah.
who are going to die from this, whether they know it or not, however they voted, doesn't matter. They're going to be affected in ways that they don't see yet.
Yeah.
But I will say, I mean, they're saying I'm going to use the military to clear out do the biggest migration purge. It's like you can't use the military. You mean the National Guard. But this is the people they haven't even gotten there yet. That they don't even know which
Yeah.
organization of the armed forces they get to use. You can't use military on American soil. It doesn't matter how many generals you fire. They can't activate here. That's part of the law. They can't do it. You have to circumvent that law, and then it just gets bogged down. So I think there's going to be a lot of like, this is not going to be an efficient place. I mean, you even have Elon Musk celebrating his department of Doge when it's like that's just a council. You're just going to be recommending things to the president. You don't have any power, you putz. Like it's you're not you haven't even been cleared by Congress for the funding of that pile. So it's just like these are people who I know have they just but they don't realize how it works. They just think, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be able to cut all this money. I'm gonna be able to do all this stuff. I'm gonna change all these things." Trump has promised things that he hasn't even thought about how he can actually affect. People, one of the big things is I don't like how expensive things are. And it's like, well, Trump doesn't get to fix that. I mean, he could change taxes. Okay. So, yeah, but then there's going to be repercussions with that. So anyway, the thing I'm thinking is that like I feel like we have a nation of people right now who are not thinking the majority are not thinking of the bigger picture and what even things mean. And going into this Congress, this whole situation, I'm like, wow, this is just going to be chaos for a while because you got these guys who are like, I'm gonna cut everything, and then it's
Yeah.
like you're gonna have to fight for every cut you make, uh, even with a Congress and Senate. It's gonna be a slog. This is gonna be
Yeah.
a kind of a nightmare in a way of Department of Efficiency my ass. This is gonna be rough for them, and
Yeah. Also, by the way, they have two heads of the Department of Efficiency, which
yeah,
is really inefficient. But
that's gonna work really well. Like I just kind of go, for the people who are despairing, my statement is like really take a close look at what's going on. But I really think you're right. This is punk rock time. You have to pick yourself up and look at your community and start engaging with your smaller community. You're not going to be able to affect what Elon Musk does. You can't.
right.
I mean, they're going to fight. I mean, they're already starting to fight. You want to make Trump mad at somebody, just talk about in the press how much somebody pulls the strings on him and watch him get mad. Like it's so easy to make them fight each other because people are saying, "Oh, Elon Musk is all over the place." He's already starting to like insult Elon Musk. He's already getting mad that people think Elon Musk is like
Right.
his buddy, and it's like that's how that works. What you can do is your community and your area and the things that are directly affecting your day-to-day life because they now more than ever we need that. And so
Yeah.
that would be what I would say to the people who are smugly stoked that there's going to be big changes. I would say you're right, hold on there, buddy. It's gonna get weird. You may find that this is things take a surprising turn. Um,
Yeah.
but it's scary, and I think that we just have to, I tried to release a statement with Alternative Tentacles. I was a part of the statement we released where we tried to remind everybody, despite whoever was president, Alternative Tentacles has served as a bastion of questioning what was going on and calling out.
Hmm.
And, a lot of people miss that. They keep going, where's your criticism of the blue? And it's like, Jello and Alternative Tentacles was incredibly critical of Biden. I think Jello called him the coelacanth all the time. This old fish,
Yeah.
prehistoric fish, and he was like very concerned about a lot of the policies he stopped doing spoken word concerts during the Obama administration because he felt like people didn't want to hear what he had to say anymore. they were getting mad at him. And he said like certain people booed when he criticized Obama's policies of not, of how often he catered to the military during his thing.
Yeah.
And he wasn't standing up against the Pentagon. He would kind of let them do whatever he wanted. And,
Yeah.
but he was like, okay, well, fuck, fine. But, he's always had the statement of like, we state what we state, and they can comment whatever they comment. We don't block people. We don't cut people off because they have to listen to what we have to say. He was like, I don't have to engage with them. They're listening to me, and I'm going to say it. They can sit there and tell me I'm out of touch or I'm ridiculous or make some sort of perception of that I'm like this crazy liberal that's lost track of what I've been trying to say for 20, 40, 50 years. But he was just like, but we have to keep saying it. We have to keep releasing it and keep questioning and keep pushing those buttons. So I think you're correct. That's the summarization. It's like, yes, be bummed, take a moment, but then pick yourself up and look around and think about how you can help the people closest to you, because that's what you're going to be able to affect. Yeah. And if there's enough of us doing that, you're going to see a change. You're going to see some sort of progress. But it's going to be tough. This is going to be a tough time for a while, and it's going to be scary. And I think that things are going to be affected in some profound ways, which I am glad that there's, that Dead Pioneers exists and that you guys are out there. Yeah. So, and I mean, you got a new record coming out and it's going to be awesome. It's crazy to me. I'm excited to hear what people have to say about it, because like I said, you put this together before this happened. And now that this has happened, it's like, it feels like it hits all the more. And I think it's really incredible. So I'm going to, as we've navigated the roller coaster of our political situation, I'm going to ask you, like, so what's next for Dead Pioneers and what's next for you? What do you have coming? You got a new record coming, and by the time we release this, that's going to be announced. So that's so exciting.
Yeah, I don't, and I know I'm in a more privileged place than many, but it's been a tough couple of years. On just the financial end, it's been just incredibly stressful and difficult. My hope is that I can just continue to maintain and provide for my family. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the goal, is to provide for my family. Yeah. And we're in this interesting moment, I think, with Dead Pioneers, because it could do something, it could not do something. I mean, you know how these things go. Like, sometimes they're amazing and sometimes they are not. And so it's interesting to look at it. All signs are pointing towards success, but I also tend to not believe things until they're in my hands, and just sort of let things happen as they may, and just try to keep as much integrity in what I'm trying to do as possible. But yeah, I mean, new records coming out. We're doing some regional touring, I think, piecemeal in the United States. We will be in Europe in May, I believe. And those details are coming together still, but it's looking like that should be pretty amazing. And so we're going to be out and about doing things. I'm still making art and things. So I have an exhibition in Pennsylvania in January that goes, I think, through most of the spring, and pulling some things together on that end as well. So, I mean, I'm still working, still trying to provide, and like right now I'm trying to make work, so we can cover our bills in December. And so, it's all like, it's interesting, because it's like, you have, the optics look amazing, but we're still trying to make it from moment to moment. And I think the Democrats have been saying that the economy is great, and I think that they're lying, because on my end it doesn't look like it's doing great at all. And I know a lot of people who are really struggling, and to that end, I guess on some level I can understand somebody voting the way that they did, thinking that it might help the economy. I don't think it will, but but
And
yeah, I mean, shot in the dark either way. To be honest, I don't. I have thoughts about Harris's campaign. I have thoughts about a lot of things, and I think that it's all kind of bleak at the moment. And had we just had the Democrats just let Bernie in 2016, I don't think we would be in this moment at all.
I
But
don't think so either. I think that was. I mean I understand they felt like they tried to dictate the moment, and I don't think it was the right message. I will never forget. I saw on TV after Sanders finally was like, okay, you don't want me. That's it.
yeah,
And on a TV on a show, it was like Good Morning America or something. They asked Clinton. They asked her like, so what are you going to do to incorporate Bernie Sanders policies and platforms into your own thing to welcome the Sanders people? And she said, nothing. They don't have a choice. And I was like, I knew that there was somebody backstage going, ah! And I was like, why did you say that? And she's like, it's me or Trump. What do you want?
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's
That's not
it.
a platform.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the
not a
platform that Harris took, and that's not a platform.
and that's it. And honestly, unfortunately, like with Harris, she did the same thing in a way, with a slightly more joyful message, I guess. But in retrospect, it feels very tone deaf. It wasn't, because yeah, I don't, I think a lot of people mistake with Alternative Tentacles, oh, you're not going hard on Harris, so you're obviously for Harris. And I was like, no, we would be really going hard with her too. We're from San Francisco. We know who Harris is, but you know, it's more concerning how many people feel like Donald Trump is like punk and can ignore these like blatant red flags
he
all over the place. So yes, we are calling
he
out
is
these
a
flags.
punk,
I mean, yeah, okay, but I mean, it's just
maybe a punk bitch, but
yeah,
yeah,
it's just it's such a weird thing to watch them throw in. But I mean, that's it. People are throwing their lot into as a shot in the dark. There's so many people who
yeah,
are like, I know he's a dick. I don't like him. I don't like him. But I need to try. And I can't do more of the same. And I was like,
yeah,
yeah, well, you're not going to get more of the same. But I also don't know if he can change the things that you're most concerned and scared of. But maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think so.
yeah,
And I'm concerned, even if he does, I'm also concerned about what else he's going to do and what the ramifications of of the things he's doing. But I don't think.
I think on
No, go ahead.
well, it was interesting on a political level because I think in 2016 it was very much like Hillary, 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 or nothing, and it didn't go well, and it didn't go well for a number of reasons. But what was interesting to me was because clearly a massive part of the discussion was not just pandering from the Democrats and trying to. I mean, like it's aligning with the Cheneys is just completely insane to me. I mean, Dick Cheney finished his vice presidency under George W. Bush with a 13% approval rating. That is just bananas. And then he comes out and is like Harris, and Harris leans into it and goes, yeah, like he likes us, so we must not be that bad.
Well, they
And
thought
it
they would
just,
grab Republicans with that, and it's
right.
like,
But another aspect, I mean, let's be honest here, a huge issue that was skirted over and demonized is what's happening in Gaza, and that there's no discussion about that. That there's no space to allow any discussion, any sort of dialogue that takes place with that. So you have a massive amount of people that are not being heard, and you have a massive amount of people who support stopping everything that's happening over there that are not being heard. And on top of that, I mean, all the protests that were happening last spring and the way that they were treated under a Democratic president. Like, I remember when they were doing, I don't remember what they were doing, but they were in Washington, D.C., and there were protests happening at Union Station in Washington, D.C. which is near the Capitol building. And I remember Harris saying, "Oh, they're just thugs and they're unpatriotic." And they're literally like Gen Z and millennial kids that are just protesting against the violence on Palestinians, that the UN is openly and outwardly calling uh, war crimes, and so they're just doing that, and the Democratic vice president is saying that these are people who are unpatriotic, and that sets a tone that is just so wildly problematic, and really undermines that free speech and free assembly component that is patriotic on some level, because it is a right that is in our Constitution. And so all of this really just becomes this shit show of omission, where they're not talking about those things, and then people are not being heard. Like, of course you didn't get the vote. You didn't even touch on it. Somebody talked or said something at one of her rallies, and she was like, "I'm talking," and that just authoritative thing, and that authoritative moment that a lot of liberal Zionists are applauding, undermines the ability to just have a conversation,
Right.
to just have some dialogue of some kind. And there was no dialogue. There was no conversation. I have a lot of compassion this election for people who were making decisions based on their conscience. And I do think on some level it's as simple as somebody just trying to do their best, because I think that's all we can do right now. Like, if you are, progressive and you voted for Harris, like, I guess I can understand why that took place. If you voted third party, I think I can understand that too. I don't understand how you could vote for Trump. I don't, because all the elements of fascism are there. All the elements of, like, the people he's surrounding himself with are unabashed white supremacists and unabashed, like, Nazis or faux Nazis, or however you want to call them. I'm waiting for him to appoint Richard Spencer somewhere, and like, it's just getting that wild right now, and so I don't understand that, but I do understand on the left side, just trying to do your best, and just trying to vote your best. But I'm also very cynical about voting and cynical about a lot of those things. But I do want to believe that people who have a semblance of progression in their voice, a semblance of leftism in their voice, people who are against fascism, people who are against racism, people who are against homophobia and transphobia, and ableism, because ableism right now is under attack, particularly under that Department of Education stuff. I have compassion for people who just did their best, because there's no good choices. We're not getting what we need. The majority of Americans, I think, want healthcare. Majority of Americans want living wages. The majority of Americans see the gap between the rich and the middle class. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and people want some level of equality. And the amount of people that are noticing that capitalism is truly suffering all of us is growing with each year. People are seeing the difficulties of capitalism, and we're all just trying to survive under those power structures that we have very little power or privilege in at all. And it's just wild to see. It's absolutely wild to see.
Well, I don't think I could have said it better. I think you nailed it. It's going to be a very interesting time, and I just hope that people really do, once they get over their despair, like, okay, like, I really hope we get people who engage, re-engage, because we need people to do so. We are not getting the right choices, and that has been evident for a long time.
Yeah.
Gregg, thank you
I think
so
we need
much.
to give each other grace. Grace, please give each
Yeah,
other grace.
that's a great term. I exactly. I think we need to give each other grace. That is wonderful. Well, on that note, I want to thank you so much. I've kept you for like almost 2 hours, man. I'm so sorry, but I really
No,
appreciate you, and I really appreciate you being here and talking to everybody. And I'm so stoked that I get to work with you. I look forward to playing with you again. I hope we can do shows together in the future. Your band's incredible, and
thank
your
you.
art's incredible. And I'm just honestly, man, I'm just a huge fan, and everybody at Alternative Tentacles is, and we're thrilled to have you as part of the family. So thank you
No,
for being
appreciate
here.
you guys. So much love, honestly and truly, so much love, and appreciate you guys.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. This has been Alternative Tentacles bATcast. We'll be back next time with another episode of something fun. And check out deadpioneers.band, right? That's the
Yeah,
site.
yeah.
And check out greggdeal.com for more art. You guys will be happy. You please look more into this. You're gonna love it if you haven't already. We have the 7-inch out on Alternative Tentacles. It is out. It is shipping. We have it. If you hear this, we got it. It's coming. And it's so great. But don't stop there. Go over to Hassel Records and pick up the first record in its entirety, and definitely pick up the next record coming out. You're gonna like it. It's really good. So, all right, thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time.